They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad or fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, party people. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph. I have a fun guest for you today, and with James out and about on spring break, my guest co-host, Mr. Jim Tiller, is back. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Big shoes to fill today.
I'm actually going to see James in a little bit because we're going to go watch some Gwinnett Gladiators hockey here, or is it Atlanta Gladiators? I don't know. It's kind of funny. I found out he was in town when he said, "Hey, I can't make this thing. I'm going to be in your neighborhood." I was like, "What?" So anyway, that's small world. All right, I'm going to let our guest today introduce himself because Dave, you've got a resume that's long and distinguished.
Thanks, Raph. So I'm David Monnier. I'm a Team Cymru fellow and chief evangelist at Team Cymru. And up until the beginning of the month, I was also our CIO. I got lucky enough to hire someone that I could hand that off to who actually knew what they were doing. That wasn't me. So I'm kidding. Of course, I don't mind the CIO stuff. But I'm with Team Cymru. Prior to Team Cymru, I've been with Team Cymru for 17 years. Prior to Team Cymru, I helped build and launch the Research and Education Networking ISAC. Prior to that, I did high-performance computing at Indiana University. And prior to that, I was a non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. So I've done all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And at Team Cymru, just for your listeners to be aware, because a lot of people maybe hear our name but don't know what we do or who we are, or
can't spell it.
Or a lot of people don't hear us at all. Yeah, or they can't spell it, right? Because it is dyslexically spelled. Cymru is C-Y-M-R-U. It's the Welsh word for Wales. So it's in their language. And our founders at the time, they were working for another company, where internally in the company they had team names, so they picked Team Cymru as their name. They ended up splitting out to make what they were doing there be a business on its own, and so they kept the name, and we went from there. It was fun when we went to register our UK company, because it turns out Team Cymru is a protected legal entity. It's the Olympic teams and national teams for olive oils. So come to find out, you can't go register a company in the UK called Team Cymru. And at the time, we were still using the Welsh dragon from their flag as the logo as well. And so they were like, extra no. So we had to scramble and come up with a new logo. But for your listeners, to give you an idea what we do, so we are a threat intelligence provider. We're not a security company. Security companies would be our customers. And what we do is we do different things for different parts of the kind of, let's call it the society that makes the internet work, right? The secret cabal that routes the packets. So on one side of the house, to the ISP, IXP, transit, all of this kind of world, we help them maximize the links that they lay, whether they fly them, float them, or bury them. All of those things are finite, right? You can, if you float a bundle of fiber across the ocean, the only thing that's ever going to change to add to that capacity is typically technologies that they put on the endpoints, right? So a single fiber used to max out at a gig. Now it maxes out, 100 gig. So without having to remove those pieces, though, that piece of fiber that they floated, the big bundles fiber, that doesn't change, right? So, and that's very expensive. Or if you fly, Starlink for every satellite they put up in the air, it's very expensive, right? So what we do for those folks is we help them to remove unwanted traffic from their networks. So we download and detonate about 1 million malware samples a day. process those, and those that have network indicator components to them, we build that information up and we share it to those folks at no cost, so that they can help keep the internet a clean place, by stopping command and control servers, things like that. And we do that for them at no cost, primarily through one of our programs called Nimbus. But then in return for that no cost capability, those partners give us the ability to create derivations. And in this case, derivations are threat hunting teams out in the world, security researchers, incident responders, all of these types of folks who have a why, or let me rephrase that, who have a what. These people who have a question where they want to know, hey, this IP just probed my network. What is it? What is it doing? Well, you can take that question to us, and all of that visibility that we see where we're helping network providers clean their networks. We can also ask, hey, have you seen this IP address in all the data you've seen? So we don't get bulk data. We don't get content data, but we do get network metadata to the tune of a petabyte or so a day. And it paints a very strong picture around adversarial movements and things like that. So basically, if you want to know what a bad guy's doing on the internet, you can ask us, or maybe the guys at the NSA will tell you. I don't know.
Good luck. That's hunting bad guys is kind of fun, right? Because I think that would be a super fun job that I am definitely not qualified to do, but it'd be super fun because it's a continuous game of cat and mouse. How much of there's a lot of talk, David, lately about throwaway infrastructure, right? Some bad guys, some bad actors want to be stealthy and keep their infrastructure removed from the end, right? So they multiple proxies jumping through different systems, compromised boxes, and whatnot. And some just don't care. What's the ratio of that?
It's more towards the do care, for what it's worth. It's very common now to see multi-tier infrastructure. So meaning working backwards through the chain, right? You have your infected device. That infected device is talking to a command and control. That command and control these days typically has a command and control of its own, to where that lowest ring is the one that they intend to burn. And then the others they manage. A lot of that, though, is a side effect. It's not down to tradecraft necessarily. It's actually mostly due to the fact that miscreant offerings are typically done as a service. So, when you have a software as a service capability, you're gonna need infrastructure to support your offering, right? So, though it appears you would think of it like, if you were a normal business, you would think of it in terms of like EDR, right? You'd say, oh, wow, look, they have multiple layers to their infrastructure, and look how resilient it would be if they lose this node, this other node's still up. I mean, it actually is, impressive business in that regard. But in reality, much of that stuff is because they're operating as a business, and they don't know necessarily who will have those endpoints. Because they basically give those endpoints, they give access to those endpoints to people that lease time on the botnets. So this is their way of breaking that down. But yeah, to give you an idea, it's most have what we would call a tier 2 component to their infrastructure. But like I said, it's not for any good movie plot reasons. It's typically just because that's how you would run software as a service, as a business offering.
I think that's super interesting, right? Because when I got into this, and Jim, you were just a little bit ahead of me there, but when we collectively got into this space, like none of that existed. Like VLC Lab fit on a floppy disk. Stone Cold and Michelangelo and all those, right? Let's go back in this, backwards. Like all that stuff. Like it was onesie twosies. Right? Then we got Creative and I Love You and Code Red and NIMDA. And the Sasser Worm, which wrecked so many of my weekends. SQL Slammer, which wrecked an entire month, at least. Those were all like fire and forget, right? Like that's the like fire ready, good luck. Like there's no aim. Somebody just found something and released it. This verticalization of attackers really is fascinating to me, because gathering IOCs, especially when the infrastructure can change so much, right? There's a finite amount of IPs out there. Their IP addresses change hands fairly regularly, right? Some of these environments are super high flux. Some of them don't ever change, right? But I think a lot of the space is now, rapidly turning over in terms of what MAC and IP address combo are out there. Using multiple layers of command and control, using compromised systems as beachheads and CNCs. Like half the email, the junk email I get is coming from otherwise it points you to otherwise totally legitimate domains that somebody stopped maintaining 10 years ago. Right, the latest one I got was like, okay, I was super curious because it looked really, really interesting. It was like, hey, this is your invoice. Please review and approve, and reply approve. I was like, oh, that's interesting. All right. So I dropped it into a sandbox and got a bunch of IOCs out of it and tracked some of them down. Like one of them, the place where it was sending me to presumably grab the dropper, right, to go figure out the kind of stage 0 thing, was like a rural hospital, I think in Kansas. Their website, which was built, I'm pretty sure, on IIS-3, in the time of dinosaurs, cyber dinosaurs, to be clear, and like ran, I think had Office 98 components installed on it. I'm thinking to myself, what the actual crap? But you got to wonder, like, okay, how many people click that, right? And then what is that reference next? And so, I guess my question to you is, as somebody that tracks threat actor movement and not just malware, but I mean like actual threat actors, how do you keep it all straight? How do you separate, like, these are the infrastructures they don't give a crap about and they'll change in 5 minutes. We've tracked them to like these things that this is their core. They care about this. They're protecting this. Like, how do you know that without telling them that so that they don't know that
Yeah, so we conduct, it's a term that we coined called threat reconnaissance, which is kind of the next evolution of threat hunting, right? So when it is that you are going out, and there's a couple scenarios here, right? So you've got layers to this. So you've got layers where it starts where you have your analyst who's interested in something that's interested in you, right? So you have that scenario. Yeah. You have the scenario where your analyst is looking at something that's interested in kind of your sector, okay. Or then lastly, you have kind of the adversary who is just out rattling door handles, right? So there's different layers to this. Well, they look and feel differently. Something that's very loud and noisy. Will either be something that's intended to burn quickly, like it's a compromised device, let's use it to scan stuff, or typically it's like researchers. But what we push people towards understanding is that you can create effectively bespoke threat intelligence for yourself based on the things that you see probing your network. You can take that in insights. And like I said, using, for example, in our case, the big telemetry data that we use is a protocol called NetFlow. It's also, or IPFix is another name for it, and it's a routing accounting protocol. But it produces metadata of what the router saw. This IP spoke to this IP at this time on this port using this protocol, sent this much data. That type of think call record, call log stuff. But what we try to do is we encourage people to say, okay, so you got a piece of malware that made it through your MTA screening, right? So whether it be Proofpoint or whatever tool you're using to scan your mail, Barracuda, or whatever, and so this made it through your defenses. So now this could have made it into the network, right? So this could be on somebody's desktop. So then you pull the executable apart, whether maybe you detonate it in a sandbox, maybe maybe you have some kind of vendor capability that can do it for you. But once you can detonate that malware and see where it's going to reach to, then go illuminate that malware and see maybe who's SSHing into that command and control point, or does it have a heartbeat to another layer? Once you get that kind of second step, right, don't disrupt it. Sit and dwell on that. And as they make their changes every day, you're updating your border policy, to accommodate it. So contrary to when you think of like hunting, right? A threat hunter goes out, finds the threat, kills it. That's what hunting is. That's the whole point, right? Think reconnaissance instead. Don't kill them. Go observe them. Create what you could think of in infantry terms, tactical dwell time. Create some dwell time over them to where then as they make movements, you can adjust accordingly. We did a big piece over the end of last summer about ICE ID, and because we had basically tracked this group's whole movements, and there's a bunch of things that people do that allow for this tracking, by the way, which I can speak to in a second. But basically, we were able to identify what was their main C2, which in this case it happened to be it lived on what the heck is the name of the ISP? I can't think of it now. Anyway, they bought Black Lotus Labs. They're a huge US CenturyLink. So this was an IP that was on Century's, I believe Century's links residential networks.
Okay.
So, and I want to say they may be partly owned by Cox, or there's another media company that makes up, and they're pretty much the ISP for the Eastern Seaboard. But anyway, they went and we were able to track the adversaries, and we were able to see like what their pattern of life looked like. We could see that they SSH'd in to do maintenance between about 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. every day, Kiev time, Central European time. And then we could see that they took all of the Orthodox holidays off. We could see all of these identifiers, that can help you flesh out a pattern of life and help you understand who is this adversary, what's the likelihood, that they're attacking us. But that kind of reconnaissance, right? That kind of let's watch the bad guys do their thing. Really puts you a step ahead, right? When you think about the realities of policy devices today, right? In particular, let's look at the network layer. And the network layer, is from a policy device perspective, that's where the fight should happen, in my personal opinion. I'm not a mathematician, but I know there's only one network relative to the tens of thousands of devices that would live on that network, right? So the network layer, in my opinion, is the place to take the fight because there's only one level. There's a single dimension to it, So you take you take the approach of going to the network layer, right, where this is at. Well, now you're limited in capability by what devices you have, right? So if you have 100 gigabit, let's say you have 100 gig backbone, there's a good chance that the routing device that you have on that backbone doing that job uses most of the power it has to do that job. So if you now say, and now put an ACL to give you an idea, our reputation feed, or let's just say the controller feed that we produced in this last hour at Team Cumry that went out to firewall vendors around the world probably has like 40,000 command and control servers in it. So imagine taking 40,000 IPs and putting them in an ACL on your border device that's supposed to be, routing packets. You would it would crater. It would be like no network is what you would end up with, until you could get in and clear that. So
I think it's called zero trust.
Yeah, exactly, right. But
Zero
now,
traffic.
if you invert this model, right, and you say, who cares about 40,000 command and control servers that Team Cumry found in the last hour? Who cares? I want to know what's attacking me, right? So if you take that other perspective and say, what's the things that have made it through our infrastructure, through our policy devices? What's the things that made it into the circle, into the center ring? And those things we should spend our time to, reverse or detonate and figure out the IOCs, then take those IOCs, illuminate them, see who out there who else. Another thing is victimology, right? If you can see the command and control with somebody who has enough external data like us, if you come and you can see the command and control, wouldn't it be great to see like, oh, hey, I work for, and just for instructional purposes, let's say we're Shell Gasoline, right? And we pull up the C2 to see what else in the world is talking to the C2, and they're all other gas companies. Oh, look, it's BP, it's Mobil, and so now you know that the person who targeted you is likely someone who's specifically targeting energy companies. Well, if we pull out our monster manual of threat actors today, right? Sorry, I had to put in the Dungeons and Dragons reference, or our fiend folio. If we get out our fiend folio of threat actors today, right, that would strongly suggest Iran. Because they have all of these energy related sanctions that are placed against them. So somebody who was out specifically targeting energy companies, we've just narrowed down our potential adversary group list, right? So those are the types of insights, not only more efficient policy, like technically efficient, meaning smaller ACLs, you're putting only in blocks for the actors that are specifically targeting you. All of their illuminated infrastructure, which I have a couple talks that I've given where we take that one piece of malware and end up painting a whole infrastructure of an actor group. We did it. I did it a few years ago off of a oil rig campaign, which are Iranians, to speak of Iran, but to where Bleeping Computer, they did some piece on there, and I was able to pull just the IOCs out of the Bleeping Computer piece, and then because they made a mistake in how they operate, I was able to find their total global footprint that was being used by nation state actor. Now, in this case, oil rig, which is APT 34, it turned out they were also being false flagged by Cozy Bear. So it's unsure, which group actually you're looking at, right? Because we're looking at metadata.
But can I ask you about that really quick? Just really quick. This is the part where I struggle is when you have certain types of threats. Let's use nation states as an example because there's a certain entity associated with that, right? I can see them, I can shoot at them, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas when working with organizations saying, okay, you represent this kind of organization, you're most apt to this type of threat, so consolidating your view and tightening your scope, right, your field of view, basically. I found that in some cases, actually, I won't say it's harmed organizations, but then it's like, okay, we're going to look at this. But in reality, they may be just kind of catching flack, even from drive-bys, right? You see, schools, universities, hospitals, and then, Bubba's bookstore get hit because they happen to be in a drive-by. How do you, I know I interrupted your thought there, but how do you juxtapose that with sort of like you're an oil company, but, Bob can still kind of come at you from a different angle, and it's still just as potentially as impactful.
Yeah, you raise a great question, right? How do you prioritize threats, right? When you're in these scenarios, right? You do have to prioritize. You can't do all the things at once, right? And that's just how the universe works, right? But let's be honest. There are kind of three tiers, I would say, of threat actor that you would need to concern yourself with. And in order, there is Bob, like you've mentioned, right? Bob's out just taking advantage of whatever he can find. Then there's initial access brokers, which are very similar to Bob. They're out just rattling doorknobs. They're out trying to open windows. But their intention is to, repurpose or sell those credentials to somebody else, so they can avoid the big charge, which is the access. Which isn't the access, which is whatever damage you do, right? Yeah. They go into Title 18 shallow water by just providing the unauthorized access, and then they avoid all the damage part, which we'll see how that all plays out when the pipeline investigation stuff gets sorted, because one of those folks that they caught in that is trying to play I was just the initial access broker. So we'll see what the court system does there. But then in the third case, you've got your targeter, you've got your operator who's works for a company, a country where he goes to work every day and there's a flag in the corner, and maybe, they wear a military uniform to work. They work for the, whatever, you name it, GRU, FSB, CIA, MI5, whatever. You can imagine all these agencies are out there, right? Well, you're never going to be able to completely stop Bob, right? Because Bob gets reborn every day to the, there's 10 more Bobs born every day who run the scripts and whatnot, right? But you do need to be able to tell the difference between Bob and the IAB, right? The initial access broker is going to look like Bob. So you still have to worry about the random stuff, right? Because those small mistakes are the things. But I would argue that the real group that you should pay attention to is the one that's going to most affect your business, right? And this comes down to appetite for risk. So when you're deciding like which of these threat types should I concern myself the most of, it's going to be the initial access broker, in my opinion, because you're never going to get rid of Bob. And you can't go in and remove your name off from the dry erase board from the targeting room for any of those military or government entities, right? So your best bet would be to focus on that middle one. Now, is there a recipe for coming to this? Not really. This is just my own take of, after seeing how these things play out, right? Now, there are instances where Bobs stumble into being an initial access broker, but it's not too often. Usually the initial access brokers are using those Bob-like tools, but they, have nefarious intent, to begin with, unlike Bob.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of thoughts on this access broker thing, the defense of, I just got them initial access, right? That's like, to use a sort of graphic and grim example, 3 people knock down the door of a house. One guy goes in and murders the family. The other 2 are like, hey, I just drove the car here. The other guy's like, I just kicked the door down. Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, you're all going to be pushing up daisies because you're all guilty. But in this case, I wonder what sort of, we tend to test and find that the national and international criminal law is ill-equipped to handle the cyber field. Completely. And boy, is it not catching up.
Yeah. No,
we're trying to, there's a podcast I listen to called Advisory Opinions. It's run by Sarah Isger and David French. They're both fantastic. Tennessean and a Texan from that know the law. And they've covered this a couple of times where you get to the judge is asking how Facebook works. You're like, this is not going to be a good case for the high techies, right? So that's my thoughts on kind of access brokers. The other thing is on who to be sort of, who do you try to protect yourself against? I'm with you though on that, because the access broker isn't there by happenstance usually, right? They are they're looking for something specific, and you can raise, and my theory is that you can raise their cost enough that they move on, because you're not on a whiteboard somewhere, right? Comrade Putin's picture isn't next to the whiteboard that says, Acme Weapons Corp, right? You're never getting off that whiteboard. But you can raise the cost to that adversary, to that access broker. They're like, all right, this one's not worth it. Move on. And then Bob's just never going to find you. That's just. So, Jim, I think we agree. I think we all agree on that. Do we?
Yeah, 100%. I think the point for me, David, where I was like, okay, we're on the same page, was you're not going to really kind of be able to deal with Bob because they're popping up everywhere, and you should be able to get a low bar to control that kind of stuff. And you're not going to be able to really deal with nation state actors if you're just a traditional business, right? School, hospital, bookstore kind of thing, right? Because they're going to come at you in a very, you're on the whiteboard. They're going to keep coming at you. So, but there is a way to defend yourself, and that is with the access broker layer, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's actually a perfectly good advice. And I think if I may have a follow-on question to that is, what do you believe in the arc of, I won't say maturity, but sophistication or competency within the security program? If I say at the very low level, I got username and passwords, and over here I've got, air gapped crazy encryption doing crazy stuff. where in that sort of arc do you think that organizations really need to start taking it very seriously? Do you think this is something that even organizations need to start thinking about like today? Because a lot of people are still thinking in very traditional sort of like, I have my firewall, I've got my VPN, and I got my MFA. I'm good to go, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on a couple of factors, and the number one thing that we see is let's call it shadow IT. The things that are spun up and forgotten about, because computing these days is not really about ownership anymore. Like nobody, like there's a lot of people who just don't own any of the infrastructure that they're reliant on. It's all leased. They spin stuff up and then they think like, well, I spun it down, I clicked on something and it's not here anymore. I don't see it, so it must be done. And they don't know, they don't realize that, well, no, not necessarily. That image may still be out there. So I guess to answer your question, it could come down to the maturity of the organization would decide like when they should start, right? Because there's a whole bunch of people out there who likely should just call an MSSP like, and shouldn't try to do it themselves.
Preach the gospel, brother.
Yeah. Which I hate to say, it's probably most people are actually should just call an MSSP. And if you don't call an MSSP, you should maybe start with a consultant who can let you know if you should call an MSSP or not. But yeah, it really, like I said, it depends. So like our stuff, for example, isn't easy to use, right? We've got 3 layers of complexity available for our products. We've got something that does most of the work for you, something that you have to ask the question of. It gives you just like almost like a stoplight. And then we have like the full nitty gritty. Here's the deep dive. Here's everything we know about this IP, which will include like all the certificate data, all the passive DNS data, all, everything this host has ever done in the last 90 days to include, these are the service banners, and all that stuff. Well, you have to have somebody who can sit down and look at that. Like if I hand somebody,
make sense of it.
If I hand somebody 1 million rows of flow data, and they're like, there's TCP 22 for 3 hours, some 6,000 instances of TCP 80. I don't know. It's TCP something, and it's like, no, that's the SSH session of the person managing it. These are infected devices reaching out to it. You got to be able to tell the story, right? And now this doesn't even necessarily mean this is what they're looking for. This is to interpret the answer that you got back to determine if it's what you're looking for, right? So, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but on the grand scale, on the spectrum, as we're talking about like this capability arc, I personally, I think we're still on the need a lot of work side of the spectrum. We're just not getting there.
Well, so you guys, if you'll allow me, pre-recording, we talked a little bit about this, but I want to make a quick pivot because we've got 10 minutes or so left to this Microsoft. Microsoft's getting pummeled right now from a whole bunch of different directions. And I will start off by saying I'm not making judgments either way on this. Okay, I'll let you guys decide. Go read the articles on your own. But the Exchange Online stolen signing key issue that goes back a year, probably a lot longer. It seems like there's some issues there, and we're talking about the 3 levels, right? Bob, the access broker, and Comrade Hacker over there. This, like, what Microsoft got popped by, arguably, in fact, I would bet quite a bit of money that it wasn't a Bob, it wasn't an access broker. It was, their name was, or there were specific names within Department of State and Pentagon whose names were on a whiteboard someplace that said communications from these people, whatever means necessary. Microsoft just happens to run the email system that these people read email on. They were the vehicle to get at the data they wanted. And, where we talked about earlier about, raising it for Bob, you just got to frustrate him. Don't give him an easy layup. For the access broker, you got to make it difficult. For that third layer, like your best, not best, I think your only option is to be able to detect and respond to like weirdness as quickly as possible. Like we say, okay, don't trust anything. Don't trust networks or accesses or systems or anything implicitly. Okay, fine. I believe that. In practice, that is excruciatingly painful on large and complex networks. I get it. Zero trust is the future, but I think it's like the future, like Star Trek is the future. Like we're going to get there maybe. But I'm not going to be around to see it. Right. And maybe it's going to be my kids. Can you guys imagine and I know a couple of you guys listening, we've had this conversation and you're employing this. Two of you guys are in the Fed space. The other couple are in very, very well funded and run large, very, very large organizations. The other 99.998% of you are going, yeah, this is impractical to a level where I can't. Like, can you imagine going into your network today and saying, nothing trusts anything, go? Literally everything breaks, right? And then Dave, like when you're talking about these sophisticated, right? Target on a whiteboard, have multiple layers of infrastructure, probably farm out some of the work to somebody else. They're paying for and or developing their own attack types. Like somebody had to go sit through and there's one of the articles said it was trial and error, but like the signing key that was in there for enterprise was also going to work on consumer, or no, backwards on consumer was also going to work for enterprise. And that was a glitch. Like that was a programming error, a mistake. Somebody went and tested that to see if it worked.
Right.
How many times before they went, oh, hey, look what I can do. Right. And in those times, how do you not get caught? How do you not make too much noise? You can't just be banging credentials away because then that's like a, hey, look, a credential stuffing attack or somebody detects it, right? So you got to go some combination of low and slow, some combination of stealth, and switch up your infrastructure. Like this gets super complex, and I'm rambling, but like, because I got all hot about this issue because somebody's like, well, what's the takeaways? The takeaways are if you're on the board,
yeah, you're done.
Yeah,
you're not.
Pray.
Yeah, exactly. Hope somebody else is more offensive than you and gets moved up on the list, right? Because that's the only thing going to save you. The thing, the big question around this breach, in my opinion, is so Microsoft is a FedRAMP certified provider. So
right.
How was federal side services, how was any of those certificates be able to be reused? Like how was any of that the case if they were FedRAMP certified? Because there should be a literal air gap there, and seemingly it wasn't, like you said. And funny enough, this likely what I predict when they do the root cause exercise is going to come down to the report is going to show that it was just laziness. That somebody, realized that they could cut corners, and that's why they reused the certificate. And it's funny because we use that in threat reconnaissance. So we mapped out, one of the things that we do is we map out bulletproof hosting companies. So for example, King servers there who got swooped up in the DNC hack by the young kid, the Kazakhstan kid from Canada. Who was blamed for the Democratic National Convention or Committee hack. Well, as it turns out, the infrastructure that was used by them was a bulletproof hosting company called King Servers. Well, King Servers, they run their business just like a regular hosting company. Like they build one Ubuntu server instance, right? And then if you need another one, well, you just send this image and roll the image out, right? Well, they reuse their SSH keys. So I was able to map their entire infrastructure, and I have a cron job that runs every day that updates all of their infrastructure. And boom, I have a running list of all of their bulletproof hosting infrastructure. And these are some people, not this specific group, No Name and King Servers are the two that we've done the most mapping on, and these two don't do it. And I'm hesitant to say this on your recording right now, but because I hate to up people's games, but we've seen some people do some gnarly stuff like route layer 2 over fiber, like like long distance, thousands of miles, so
What?
that so that the infrastructure appears to be in a different data center. This is around SASAM stuff, so nasty, or CP as it used to be called, but now SASAM, kitty porn, But these were people who were going through great effort to hide where the actual data center was. So the police would come and raid, right, kick in the door at data center A, only to find out that data center A is just a router, and that and delivering a layer 2 wave. So you can't even tell via BGP where the other end is. That you had to call who owns these circuits. Where is the circuit terminated?
Yeah, literally follow the fiber down the road.
Right. And then now imagine, you can send layer 2 across multiple fiber segments. So now imagine the subpoena process, to get to the bottom of that. So these are people who are trying their damnedest to not get caught by anybody, right? They're trying really hard to not get attribution done to them. And our guys are able to do attribution on them because they're lazy, because they reuse certificates. So
At the root of, and I've read a couple of these articles on this Microsoft attack, and all of them say that because of we'll say improper but insufficient log or data retention,
right,
we're just likely never going to know how it really happened or where it came from. We know the damage done, roughly speaking, and I think that's the part that bothers me the most. Is like, I get it. It happens, right? And there's very little you can do if you're a name on a whiteboard. But being able to come back from that and say, here's what we've learned, here's what we've seen, here's where we can do better next time. Not having that ability is what, like, you say, oh, what keeps you up at night? Not having the ability to learn from something that just happened. Right. Not being able to operationally adjust for the next one that's coming that way, right? Because that's the truly scary thing, right? And so somebody said, like, hey, what's your takeaways? I was like, well, longer extended infrastructure logging, right? Keep packets if you can, keep metadata for as long as possible, so from a network perspective what happened, where it came from, where did it go, and what did it do. Collect time sync, and then collect telemetry from as many devices as possible. And listen, like, I know this is not what people want to hear, but if you are a name on a whiteboard, you know what? Buckle that chin strap. It's going to get rough. Yeah. And we are in a constant, this is the part that I think that those that make comments, I'll say uninformed comments in news articles and on TV, and you can always tell who's super uninformed about this, because they make comments that, like, well, all you have to do, like, stop talking, like, you lost me, right? Because this is a constant knife fight in a dimly lit room where this is like the zombie movies, where it's not like there's 10 adversaries, you kill them and you move to the next room. They just keep coming. And eventually you get tired, you want to take a break, and you pray to God your partner steps up in your spot, and they're just as good, and your knowledge transfer is clean and perfect. Otherwise, they're overrun, you're overrun, and we're all dead.
Yeah, and for most people, they also experience all of that reality that you just said. They experience through what I call Western eyes. Because if they were somewhere else in the world, you can actually make yourself so hard to catch electronically that your name moves over to the kinetic side of the whiteboard, where make people upset enough for you, and now it won't be your email that they'll be looking for, and through Western eyes, we would never imagine that's a possibility. But I have news for you. In reality, that's always a possibility.
Yeah. Well, and whether it's a 7-foot bearded guy with a Kalashnikov or GPS coordinates punched into a Reaper drone, like,
that's right.
The end of your existence is nigh, son.
Yeah, that's right. No, I know of people. There are people out there who have had hits put out on them by Eastern European gangs. This is back when commercialization of miscreancy was a new thing. So this wasn't even, big money stuff yet. This is, pre-Gonzalez, which was the big TJ Maxx. This is pre-TJX even. So we're talking about over pizzas and stuff.
Look at what happens down in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you put something on Facebook and as an example, and cartel hangs you from a bridge.
That's what
so there's actually
a bridge.
Yeah. So there's a very real physical component of this. I think a lot of people just sort of think computers think that kind of stuff, but in reality, you can get threat to the point where they want to take action.
They're looking for you, right? Like that meme where the guy's like, "You don't have to run and hide. They looking for you." I forget what it was, like a news clip where someone had snuck into somebody's house, and this was the brother of the person, and they ended up like sending it to music. It's pretty funny. Anyway, showing my nerd card.
That's right. Well, look, great conversation, guys. This is, I think, having this conversation with two people that know, you guys both know this industry well enough, and you've been around long enough. David, you're in this, in that knife fight every day. If I may extend the metaphor, with night vision goggles from a distance, right? You're trying to observe but not get caught up in it. Mm-hmm. And then Jim, you've been in that knife fight for years now. We've been some of that we've been in together, and it gets. This is my concern is adversaries have the tactical advantage over us in some cases because we tire the onslaught. This is why people, click on 1,000 MFA things that show up on your phone. You're just like, okay, just go away. Like, I just want to sleep. Leave me alone for an hour. Right. And I fear, and this is not to start another conversation because we need to cut this one, but I fear that the way we're trying to solve security right now, because of all the talk of like the insufficient, all these job openings and you don't have enough workers, we're trying to solve a problem of scale with more people rather than, automation and some sort of scaling factor that is not people, right? I feel like what we're looking at, again, to make it, for some reason, I'm in the grim metaphors today. Like, this is World War I, Russia versus Germany. Russia's just going to throw, enough bodies at it that eventually the enemy runs out of bullets, right? And then you win. You overrun the enemy. That's not how this is going to work for the defenders. We're just not going to be able to staff that many bodies in this thing, no matter what. You guys agree?
Yeah, right. Just one adversary group alone, PLA, all on its own. That's not contractors. That's just literally the people who put on uniform, go to work every day. They outnumber the rest of the population's cyber defenders.
Yeah,
this is one adversary group, just one. So and I hate to tell people, like, people used to laugh about how much data China would exfiltrate when they would do things, because like sometimes how people knew they had the problem, and this is at the time a lot of the internet was still metered, because they would get a huge bill. They would get a huge bill for their internet traffic, and they would go and say, oh, somebody downloaded, and at the time this was a lot, but somebody downloaded 100 gigabytes of data to China. Wonder why? Oh, look, it's the host that has all our blueprints on it, right? And that's how that's how they would get caught, was because nobody else noticed. It's and people would laugh and say, well, what are they going to do with 100 gigabytes worth of our files? Well, they're going to have people look at them because they have the people. They have enough people to actually look at them. And now that's what they're doing. And did you see the long game? Not to tangent us too far, but did you see the long game with the XV library for OpenSSH in the last couple of days? Have you seen this?
Oh, yes. I read, that is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it took years.
Like 4 years, I think, right?
Yeah.
And multiple identities and commits and side projects.
Absolutely. Helped other projects, did actual patches, fixed actual bugs in some of the stuff. And
that's
then
nuts.
Showed up and did this other stuff as well.
100%.
If
Awesome.
you look, the diurnal pattern of the behavior doesn't match the rest of their commits. All their commits happened in a certain time. This is going back to how signals, by the way, could be patterned. The stuff that we do. I almost said the SH word. Hopefully that's all right. But anyway,
My show, I can do what I want.
But if they plotted all of their commits over time on a diurnal clock, and you can see where in the world they're from, because that's just how that works. And the commits that were so bad were Beijing time, and the rest of this person's commits are not in that. We're not in that time window typically. So now there's speculation that that person who was running that persona, that maybe there was multiple people using the account, or that the person, because this person, by the way, was like looking out for the developer originally, the maintainer. They said, oh, you have illness in your family, you don't need this extra problem, let us help you out. I mean, they like sent actual heartfelt words in the whole 9 yards before they were made the maintainer. They handed over the retainer to this person. And I mean, think about that. That's years. That took years, literally years. Nobody's better equipped for that than, well, Chinese government.
Long game, baby.
Long game.
All right, David. This has been fascinating. I gotta end this because this has been a long one. But I value this conversation because it just illustrates through your data points and your experience what we've been saying for a long time, is that I like that 3 layers, folks. If that's something you could use right in presentations and risk discussions of the Bob, the access broker, and the whiteboard.
I like to use the critical reflection model, which is what, so what, and now what. That's that's what I frame things against.
I like
anyway,
that.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Raf. Jim, always good to chat with you guys. If folks out there want to know more about an IP address or a domain, drop me a line. I don't know if you do show notes. It's been a while.
I will. I'll do some show notes.
Yeah, so you can reach me at LinkedIn as David Monnier, Monnier. I caught one of the vanity domain or vanity links for LinkedIn years back, so it's just my full name. Yeah, so the first one, everybody else after that has to have some numbers after it. But anyway, if I can help anybody out there, feel free to drop me a line. We are literal internet superheroes. I didn't get into any of that part, but Team Cumry is a company designed to save and improve human lives is our motto.
I love it. That's why we had you on. Great cause, man. Great team.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks, David. And Jim, that was fun, man. Thanks for joining us. Absolutely. It was awesome. All right, folks. Thank you for listening. This has been another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. I hope you learned something. There's a lot of notes there's a lot of takeaways, a lot of notes you can take from this one. You could have an entire conversation about threat modeling and risk modeling and budget modeling, for that matter, and staffing, and why you should definitely not be doing your own SOC, as David so eloquently put it earlier, and we violently agreed with. So, all right, thanks for listening, you guys. We'll catch you another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. That's the music, and we're